Hello, my name is Chuck Wolf. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolf@cjwolf.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hi, I'm Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport, Connecticut, listener-supported radio. We're a community radio station, and we also can be heard on WPKN.org. And for those of you who are familiar with my show, The Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, you know that it also has a number of podcasts available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and others, as well as some of the key shows that I've really enjoyed that I thought were really worth sharing. I've included on what's called the Public Radio Exchange. Today, I'm going to be talking with a guest. For regular listeners, first of all, thank you very much for tuning in again. I know many of you like to talk with me about things that are going on in your lives, and I'll have to wait till the next time I'm back on the air live. This is a recorded session because I'm going to be talking to an entrepreneur, someone I got to meet and got to know and like, and someone who I think's got something really exciting to talk about. He's worked really hard to create a really powerful, and it looks like incredibly useful, new assessment to assess emotional intelligence abilities. And he's going to have a chance to talk about that. And I think you'll find that really interesting. I also had a chance to have some small influence on what he's doing and how he's doing it. And I feel really pleased that he really likes the idea of the Emotion Roadmap and has found a way to make his model inclusive of that. And we'll talk a bit about that as well. But I'd like you to hear about how his company is being formed, how it's being launched, and something about him and his background, because I think you'll enjoy it and learn something useful as we go along today. So again, thank you all for listening. For new listeners, in case you tune in for the first time, I do some interview shows with people who are really have some wonderful ideas, innovative ideas to share that I think are powerful and useful. I'm always looking for ideas that are interesting, but more importantly, useful. And I think what you'll hear from Cliff Lonsley is that he has some really interesting and useful information to share today. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Cliff now. I'm going to share some of his background that he shared with me. Just going to read this. This is a little bio piece for him. And then we're going to start talking about his previous work, how he got to this place, about his tool, the new assessment he's got coming, about his business, and a little bit about the marketplace and where emotional intelligence is going. For those of you that are paying attention to the field, there's a couple of things that I'd like to say up front. One is the field has a lot of different models out there. And so in some ways, the field can be confusing to some. But I think what's very clear, and isn't confusing at all, is that the idea of the importance of emotional intelligence continues to grow. It first began to be heard and talked about in the 1990s, and where lots of interesting and what seem like really high quality ideas are launched at different points in time, they don't last often. They seem to disappear. This hasn't. This is kind of exploding in the marketplace. Everybody is talking about all kinds of things that have happened in recent years. The pandemic, who saw that coming? Nobody. The war in Ukraine, people didn't see that coming for the most part either. What we have in front of us is a lot of challenges in our world, a lot of emotional challenges in our world, including the introduction of artificial intelligence, which has been around for a little bit, but I think that's going to be exploding too. And what that means is well, we've got a lot of people speculating about what it means, but I don't think we know. But one thing we do know about all these different kinds of challenges we face is that our emotions are in play. And the better we can learn how to manage our emotions and influence the emotions of others, the better our chances of surviving and thriving going forward. So I love doing this work. I'm really happy to have Cliff on. Let me tell you a little bit about Cliff. Cliff is an entrepreneur and emotional intelligence research practitioner. His first honors degree was in educational psychology at Manchester University. He set up a large leadership and HR/LD development company in 1990, which he led as CEO until he retired from the role in 2008. He sold the company some years after. To follow his passion for EI under a new company called Emotional Intelligence Academy, he partnered with Paul Ekman, PhD, for 10 years from 2010 to help take Paul's research across the globe. He developed the new generic EI model under the discipline of a PhD in Manchester with Paul as a mentor and Don Saklovsky, PhD, as his external examiner. His thesis was published in 2020, and the Emotional Intelligence Academy is about to launch an EI ability assessment tool after 2 years' work aligned with the EI model in their doctoral thesis. He is scientific advisor for Warner Brothers Discovery for EI and behavior analysis on a real crime series, now in season 7. He has been married for 40 years, has 3 sons, 2 who are psychologists who co-own and manage the Emotional Intelligence Academy, with his 3rd son, a talented actor leveraging and using EI skills picked up from the family business. He lives for 2 grandchildren, Bo and 3, and is it Kira? I'm sorry, what? Kira 4. And he plays a euphonium brass and has just bought a Triumph motorcycle and a TIG welder to keep him from under his wife's feet. And he told me about how he used to be a welder way back when, and how that skill has come into play when someone gave him a bid that was out of this world to try and do some work for him that he decided he could do for himself. So he's somebody who believes in getting things done. He's not afraid to do all kinds of different work, and he's been very successful in a number of ventures that we're going to hear about today. So Cliff, welcome to our show. Thanks for being our guest. And I guess I'd like you to just, if you want to emphasize anything in the bio, by the way, I would like to say to all of my listeners out there that Paul Ekman, you probably may not know his name, but he is one of the most famous people in the world for teaching all kinds of people in areas where it's absolutely critical, like in the FBI or the CIA or in customs, or where you're worried about, or in the TSA, where you're worried about our people doing dangerous things, because he has been the leading expert in the world in teaching us to recognize the emotions and faces, all the different muscles that impact what people are feeling that most people don't know about. Paul Ekman is really the go-to expert in the world. And so the fact that Cliff had a chance to work with him is pretty exciting, actually. So anyway, Cliff, anything else you'd like to emphasize in the bio and the background that I shared that you sent to me?
It's a pleasure to be here, and that summary really does a very quick rundown or run up the timeline, so thank you for that.
Oh, also, I should mention to you that Cliff's accent, I guess, is a part. You grow up in Manchester in England, or so, where are you from originally?
Lived there for 64 years now, yes.
Okay, so Cliff is talking to us today, and when I did the recording from Manchester and in the UK, and so it is important to understand that emotional intelligence is a worldwide phenomenon. And actually, Cliff is got your business is going to be launched, and it's going to be you're going to service the world as best you can. So why don't you tell us first a little bit about your background, how you came to this, Cliff, how you decided that emotional intelligence was the area you wanted to be in after creating and running your own business? What led you to emotional intelligence?
Okay. Well, my early career was in engineering and engineering management, and then I moved into teaching management. So in my mid-20s, that's when I took the psychological educational degree at Manchester to develop my psych. My interest in people was a lot deeper than my interest in engineering. So if I could work out what other people were thinking and feeling, and also what I was thinking and feeling, to impact on the development of leaders and managers in the organizations we were working with, then the impact and the satisfaction was much higher than dealing with stuff and electronics and so on. But in moving into there, I very quickly realised that emotional intelligence was key, but it was treated as a soft skill, almost like redundant and secondary. We don't want to. We don't bring your emotions into work. This is about logic, getting things done, and leave that at the doorstep. And that soft skill label used to diminish it, and the acceptance and receptiveness to it in middle management, leadership, and corporate organisations. There was a lot of resistance, and that's frustrated me a little bit. We were working in a sensible company when I was about 26, which is called Development Processes Group. And this is to try and get the emotional intelligence into the leadership curriculum. So we're working with universities, working with the business schools to broaden the curriculum away from just the strategy and the planning and the cognitive stuff. And it was hard work. It was hard work because there was nothing on the market, and the market was telling us this, that could readily be brought in, because you mentioned from the 90s, the diversity of models across trait emotional intelligence, ability emotional intelligence, and the mixed models in the middle was confusing for anyone wanting to engage in developing emotional intelligence or incorporating it into leadership, teamwork, well-being work. And
you know what? Maybe, Cliff, I could stop you, because I'm assuming my audience listening doesn't know about what those different groupings are. Could you talk a little bit about where your model fits and what trait is and what the mixed model might be? Just a little highlight, just so I just want people to understand what you just said, because I think it's an important concept.
Yeah. So an emotional intelligence model is based on traits, or you might say personality factors. Are things like they're optimistic, they're glass half full, they're positive minded. Now those are traits or characteristics. They're not right or wrong. They're just part of a person's personality, preferences, or leanings. So if they're not right and wrong, it can't be really measured and judged like, say, IQ can. So my passion has been, can we get an EQ or an emotional intelligence measure that carries as much weight as an IQ measurement? Now, if you imagine IQ, nobody would accept anyone coming in with a piece of paper with an IQ score that's been self-reported or even rated by people around them on perceptions, because that's subjective faking, it's perception-based, it's subjective, and nobody would accept that as a standard. So the traits emotional intelligence models have been heavily criticised, and I cover this in my thesis, about it can never be an intelligence if you're using traits and self-report. So we had to respect traits because they're an important context, performance and ability, but not make them the primary factors within an emotional intelligence model. So Mesquite, for example, broke the mold, and credit to the Mesquite model, because that used its abilities. So that does have right and wrong answers that were derived from consensus and subject matter expert opinion. So that if your opinion compared to the masses or to the right answer, and there was two models going on with Mesquite, then that means you too have the same level of ability as those people. So it's measuring knowledge, understanding, skills, and abilities is the ability model. Trait is measuring preferences, traits, and personality. Now, then what evolved was, well, hang on, there's some good bits here and some good bits here. So a few of the developers and the architects of some of the other models which people use are a mix of the ability statements, like skills, and also traits. Now, that is very, very difficult to measure with one instrument, because you can use right, wrong answers for an ability if it's accepted from theoretical current research and by subject matter practitioner input and validation, but you can't do that with the traits. So this is why the critics are probably being a little bit aggressive to say that therefore emotional intelligence will never work. So in the 90s, a lot of research was done, but not much has been done in the last 20 years. And so my plan and part of selling my last business, which was training leaders and training HR practitioners, because they're the ones who make things happen in companies. So that's the journey to leadership and development. So that we ran that for 30 years. But part of that work is I set myself a goal to retire at 50. We employed another CEO. He got shares in the company and so on. And we had a plan to sell that within 5 years, and he knew that. So I transitioned out of that. Now, that gave me the financial freedom to do what I wanted to. And what my passion was to set up Emotional Intelligence Academy, which we did 12 years ago, to try and wrestle with this soft skill, to give it the recognition that we know it needs and warrants in terms of personal development. So that company was set up 12 years ago. That was 2008. And then I thought, right, where do I go to? I'm now on sabbatical, and I'm financially free. The company has obviously provided the resources for me to live on. So I had financial independence with the company. And when we sold it, of course, that was even more comfortable. So I can now invest heavily into the research that was driving my heart, rather than the business that was only really engaging my head because of that frustration.
So rather than sit back and enjoy the fact that you got financially free, you decided that, nope, you wanted another challenge. You looked at the field of emotional intelligence. You saw it's kind of all over the map. By the way, early on you mentioned the mosquito. I'll just mention that that's Jack Mayer, Peter Salovey, and David Caruso's model of emotional intelligence abilities. And that you can measure. And I've been working really closely with them over the years, as regular listeners know. But still, there's still all these other models out there. And I have found that while they're not always measuring ability, as you pointed out, I think it's an important point to recognize that they all are helpful. I mean, if I find out that somebody's optimistic, that might tell me something about, can they handle a job in sales where they're going to be rejected a heck of a lot more than they're going to be accepted. If they happen to have, other kinds of traits that are sort of useful for a particular kind of job I'm hiring, that's useful information. And there's been research that support. My good friend Ruvan Baron at some point was the sort of like one of the key people creating that kind of model. And I think it's been well researched and well respected, and one of the most interesting and useful assessments over the years. So while I got really enamored with the ability model, I also recognize other models are useful. And of course, Dan Goleman and Richard Boyatzis were famous for the I guess it was initially the emotional competence inventory. Now it's a social and emotional competence inventory. And it's been purchased by several consulting groups, but it also is really useful. Do I think that you're good at handling your emotions? Do I think that you're good at managing conflict? Those kind of questions resonate across the board. So of course, those are useful too. But I think the real science that most psychologists would agree on, if there's such a thing as emotional intelligence, or involves abilities. And you've kind of tried to take the best of all these worlds, it seems like, and package them in what you're doing. So if you're sort of telling us that, one, you could have stopped, you could have just hung out, you did really well. And as a business person, successfully, you learned a lot and you decided to engage. Also, you've got a family business going on, which has its own unique aspects to it. And that involves a lot of emotional challenges in my experience, as well as, so I think, at least for me, the model has become important, not only for myself and the way that I use it with clients, but for me also. Have you found kind of the tools that you work with to be useful to you on a personal level at all?
What you don't know about I think I know a lot about emotional intelligence in terms of structures, frameworks, and models now. But in terms of what you don't know about other people, so there's a little diagram I've used in a blog where it's a P on a drum skin. And usually what we know about others' emotions, others' lives, their stuff that they come into an interaction with, we know so little about. And so I've stopped making assumptions. And your emotion roadmap is key to this in terms of one of the influences on the model, is in anticipation of an interaction with others. the keeping the mind open to the possibilities of them presenting something that's as small as a pea, but what's going on for them, their story too, their baggage, their traumas, their history, their rucksack of stuff that they're bringing into an interaction, you might not know anything about. And so it teaches you to be humble and curious when interacting with others. And so I'm less impulsive, having gone through this in-depth research. And I think if we can help individuals to pick up those principles when they are going into an interaction with others, that prepared state of self, and being able to regulate and adjust our own emotions appropriate to the goal of the interaction, but also guess and make a few hypotheses in your preparation work about what they're going through. What if is this a sad occasion? Are they fearful? Are they angry? And not to make any pre-decisions, but to lay down the framework of what might be going on. So when we're in there, we don't get too many surprises. But once that comes in, we can then engage on the correct channel to make the interaction work for whatever the goal is of that interaction. So I think that's a big piece, which I know you're a big fan of too, of making sure that interaction is prepared for and handled sensitively, respectfully, and responsibly, if we care about the interaction and the person we're having that with.
Well, a lot of the work that I've talked with you about, and obviously people that listen to the show know that I'm always speculating ahead of time on key circumstances or situations I'm facing with other people, what they might be feeling. And I try to position it as best I can in terms of what I might feel if I'm in their spot, but also recognize that they're not me. They are different. And I might know a little bit about them, and I might not know very much that really matters. The idea of the pea, the small little vegetable that represents a tiny bit of knowledge. I think a lot of people take a very different approach, I think, in real life, where they assume that they know how another person's going to feel. And they put themselves in their place and they assume that they would feel like they did. And that's a good starting place, I think, for people. But I think if you stop there, you really limit your chance for success, because you really want to ask yourself, how is Cliff different than Chuck? How are we the same? How are we different? And differences matter. The differences matter. So if I might feel a certain way, well, I start there, but I don't stop. I say, what have I learned about Cliff that might make him feel differently about something that I'm about to say? And to the best of my abilities, I try to go in. But like to your point, I think, Cliff, I don't want to assume I know. I do want to have some assumptions about what's possible, but just that it's possible, not that it's accurate necessarily. And so I think the idea of emotional planning and preparing, that's key to the roadmap. It's not something people do normally. So it is something worth doing. And I'm glad we're able to spend a little bit of time earlier before we started this conversation talking about how that is also part of your model. Perhaps in talking about how you came to this, you talked about the background, being in leadership, knowing how important it is for leaders to be able to impact the emotions of others. I mean, that's been the work I've been doing for a very long time now. And the more I can help leaders understand how much more that they can accomplish if they pay attention to their own emotions and the emotions of people that are on their teams. They can be a team of 50 or 10 or 5 or 5,000 or 50,000. And it's still important to think about the kind of emotions that your culture, your workplace, your conditions, it all impacts how people feel about where they're working. Now, your model, let's talk a little bit about that. So there are these 3 different types out there. You've tried to blend some of these things. Let's talk a little bit about your model. It is captured, and other people have a similar model. We have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social interaction. You want to tell us about your model and what your tool measures?
Yes. So we took the models that were already existing and strong in the marketplace and aggregated them to find what is it that's common to the models that's appreciated and valued by the research community and the organization's practitioners, and what are the outliers. Well, what are the bits that are criticised? And we found 12 challenges, but that thesis pulls together the 8 models.
Okay.
It aggregates the core, and we wanted a generic model. Now, some of the models are dedicated to leadership. Some of them are to well-being. Now, we didn't want to restrict the applications of the model just to leadership, because some people don't want to use EQ or EI for leadership. They want to do it for teams, for well-being, for individual development, and so many other applications. So we took off the outliers that made it context specific, and we also took out the traits and personality factors and left the ability factors in the middle. And then we found the common ground between them, and also the common ground between people. We didn't even have a definition of emotional intelligence when I came into the PhD. There were dozens. So I had to aggregate those two into a definition and represent them back to the people who originated other definitions, and many of them are a member of the CREO network we mentioned, to say, does this actually capture everything in your definition, and does it not frustrate you or irritate you that I've added something that other people have used? So pulling that together into a definition, which I can read that for you, I've got it here, which is the ability to perceive, understand, and influence our own and others' emotions across a range of contexts to guide our current thinking and actions to help us achieve our goals. So I got very little kickback on that definition, apart from some people didn't like goals. They thought that sounded a little bit manipulative. But when I expressed it's our goals, which could be the joint goals, but not always. If I'm a martial artist, my goal is to beat you, not for us to have win-win. But sometimes win-win might not be appropriate to go into an emotional intelligence model if you're a martial artist or even a business person. The Pepsi-Cola, their mission statement is to beat Coke. It's an aggressive win-lose agenda to protect their employees, their brand, the welfare, the children, and the pensions of their staff, and that it sounds kind of aggressive. And so sometimes win-win is inappropriate to force feed a personal value into an emotional intelligence model that might not be used for that reason. Now, we hope emotional intelligence is going to be used for pro-social reasons, but we can't dictate that value onto a potential user. And so we wanted to keep it generic. And we got a lot of support for that. And we didn't think we would, because we thought, oh, that's watering it down, is it? So our assessment model, our questions don't just ask about work context, they ask about social and family context outside work, because your emotional intelligence is what you carry with you wherever you go, whether it's with strangers, with friends, with family, with children, with work colleagues, with bosses, with stakeholders, with customers. And if you can transfer that emotional intelligence ability across those contexts, then that's holistic development. So we went for the holistic approach. So the model, yes, came down into those 4 quadrants. There was 5 quadrants initially, one about motivations, but motivations again contaminated the model. We want to keep it pure. And most of the researchers and the models kept this centered around these 4 core clusters or quadrants, as we call them. And then within them, we've got 12 competences, 12 descriptions of abilities that can be measured right or wrong. And that's why early on, I took advice from Paul Ekman. It took me a year to get to work with the guy because he had Rottweilers in his office protecting him, because he had relationships before me that probably didn't go as well as he wanted them to, and twice bitten, 3rd time shy. And so I said, look, Paul, you've got a hard drive there of 50 years research. You're in the Time magazine for being one of the most influential people, not just an influential psychologist, influential person for the breakthroughs you made with emotions. You're doing some lectures. Your research, he started to deplete his research in the last 15 years. But before that, his papers and publications were vast. I said, please let us get this out to the world. And so the model that Paul and I worked on is something that we've replicated with this new emotional intelligence model. That's simple. Give us your hard drive. I'm an educationalist. I know about pedagogy. I can convert this into a learning process rather than a lecture. So it's a development process. So we did that. We designed 2 courses. Initially, just a 3-day course for emotional skills and a 4-day course for evaluating credibility and truthfulness, because that's the sexy bit that the TSA, the Transport Administration System in America for security, took on board, because they wanted to see when people are behaving or from their demeanor, can we work out who the bad people are, who the good people are, who's telling us a lie, who's telling us the truth. Now that's a sexy bit, but it's a derivative of emotional intelligence. And Paul was his first publication, Emotions Revealed, his first book, was about emotions, and he was dragged into that security environment. So it's and funny enough, when I replayed back the 4 sections of his Emotions Revealed book from 2003, first edition, I said, Paul, this is emotional intelligence. He struggled to accept emotions as an intelligence because he's anchored onto IQ and it not being changeable over age. And because emotional intelligence, emotional skills can be developed, there's a bit of a conflict for him. And I've caught a good podcast that we're going to share with our teams in a month or so, between Paul and I, looking at his transition over 90 minutes, from 45 minutes, from a conversation about can't be done to actually, if you carry on with the PhD, I can see how that could achieve what's happening. So a little bit of tension in a 45-minute podcast led to something that gave me the confidence that if we could keep to certain parameters, even Paul would be influenced to change his mind about emotion intelligence could be a reality if it's treated the right way. And that's focused on abilities, right, wrong answers, and making sure whoever decides the right, wrong answers are trusted and respected. And that's obviously why you needed to come to people who have that depth and breadth of knowledge in terms of the association we're a member of.
It's fascinating. Let me stop you. I want to comment on a couple of things you said. One is that win-win may not be appropriate for all circumstances that you face, like Pepsi and Coke. I would say that Pepsi and Coke are aligned when they're dealing with the government around regulations on soft drinks, things like that. So there are times when Pepsi and Coke do want to work together in win-win scenarios for themselves as companies that have similar interests. But at the same time, they are competing heavy competition between them, and of course they want to do better for themselves, their employees, their stakeholders, their shareholders, and so forth. And while I think that some people saw the word goals as manipulative, some people see emotional intelligence in general as manipulative. But it's really interesting because I think the word manipulation has some. I think language has. It has emotional implications. So if I ask, because I do a number of keynotes, okay, throughout the years I've been doing keynote speaking, and there are times when I'll ask an audience, how many of you are comfortable influencing other people? Everybody raises their hands. How many of you are comfortable manipulating other people? A few people raise their hands, right? What's the difference between influence and manipulation? They're not sure. If you look at them up in some dictionaries on the web, I've seen that manipulation is about influencing others. Influencing is about manipulating others in terms of how they define these things. So I think when we influence people because we're interested in a win-win scenario, we're trying to get our children to behave in a certain way that we think is conducive to their lives, to their careers, whatever it might be. Sure, we're trying to manipulate and influence, and all at the same time, because we want them to do what we think is in their interest, what we think is the right thing that's going to be helpful to them. That's not about a win-lose. That's trying to have them win too. But we feel sometimes we push too hard and we don't do it that well. But when we are trying to influence people to achieve goals, emotional intelligence is very helpful with that. It's also very helpful to manipulate people. I think of it as amoral. I don't think of it as moral. Some people think emotional intelligence is about being nice. And of course, at times, emotional intelligence is about being nice. But also, sometimes emotional intelligence is, for instance, if you have an employee that is a good employee, they have real skills, somebody in your workplace, but they're doing some things that might get them tossed. They might get derailed because they got some things that, and they don't think they're going to get tossed, and they don't really believe you when you tell them that, hey, you can't continue to do such and such and still stay here, much as I want to keep you. And if that's the case, I want them to have a little fear walking out the door, that they can't just continue to do the same things. If they blow it off and they don't feel that fear, they may continue, and I got to let them go.
And sometimes,
so I think my point is, I want to say that sometimes it's not about being nice to get people to do the right thing.
And sometimes the nice people are more manipulative than the emotional intelligence people. And so the niceness can be a tactic or passive aggression.
Sure can.
As more in line with the dark side, the dark triad of narcissism.
Yeah, so I do think emotional intelligence can be used in well, I think the people that gravitate to the field want to do the right thing for folks. So, I mean, that just happens to be the case. But I think there's a lot of people, we've all seen leaders that we think of as highly manipulative, whether in the workplace, in politics, wherever we've seen them. And we also know that at the same time, maybe there's certain people that they're working to have those people win and others not win. So it's more complex than just simply saying it's win-lose, but I do want people to understand that, hey, if you think of this, all of this can be thought of as manipulative. But if your goal is that you're creating win-wins wherever you go, you're trying to help people to have the best possible, be the best possible versions of themselves, help companies create the best possible experience for the people that work there, for their customers, for anybody that they touch. I mean, yeah, you're manipulating and you're influencing, but you're doing it because your values are such that people look at that and they say, I'm proud to be part of this.
That's it. And it's context specific. I mean, even the martial artist, I might fight you for the gold medal, you might be silver, but we may be compatriots, even members of the same club, and we'll go to the bar afterwards and we're friends. But on the mat, it's win-lose. And if you have emotional intelligence skills and read your intent, before you're about to strike, and use that knowledge to block and strike back, then I'm using emotional intelligence to beat you. But if, as long as that's done in a framework of ethics and safety, then we've got to be careful that we don't force things into a model that restricts its use.
I mean, look at your assessment. You're going to be competing with other assessments. What company is going to buy what assessment? Well, you'd want to get the bid. You want to get your proposal accepted, right? And yet you're asking people who are selling different proposals and different assessments to help you create yours. So at some level, we're all in trying to do things that make the world a better place. At other levels, we're competing for business and for dollars.
It's horses for courses. And by consulting with the CREO membership, 105 members, who include some of the architects of many of the 8 models which are up in the first division there. I've been conscious, and this is down to your emotion roadmap again, I've been conscious of what's going to go through their mind. They've got non-disclosure agreements with their commercial partners. They've got loyalty to something they've been working on for decades. But why should they help me with honest feedback in terms of creating something that could be a competition? Now, because we've seen the exponential increase in emotional intelligence research, you just have to go on Scopus to look at the graph. The exponential interest in emotional intelligence means there is scope for all models. Some people may want something that's more trait-based, some mix-based, been around longer. People might say we're too new to buy right now. And that'd be accurate. Where Mesquite's been around for decades, so we might have to be patient before we make a significant impact on the market. But by then, it's not about taking market share. It's about watching the market grow and gain confidence in the construct of emotional intelligence, so more people come to the table for it, and then we all win. In terms of,
I think so too, Cliff. Cliff, can you tell us a little bit about your tool, what makes it unique, and so that I make sure that people understand what you're doing and what you're about to launch?
It's the sales pitch. Then is it's uncontaminated. it's not biased to any particular sector. It's ability-based, so it can be equated not underneath IQ, side by side with IQ. IQ, EQ, it can be measured. But we're triangulating the data. Nobody's done that before. So some people use self-report. How do you behave? Do you do this? So on. Usually with a Likert scale of sometimes, never, always. Some people are using 360-degree feedback. So in other words, if you're in an organization, that might be feedback from your boss, feedback from two co-workers or peers, feedback from a couple of staff. So 5 people who know you well, who are the beneficiaries or victims of your emotional intelligence. Are often best placed, still subjective. There's agendas. People like you, they're scared of you. We've got to factor variables in there. What's their level? If their level is down here and they're 20%, you're 50%, they might judge you as 80 because they're doing a relative assessment against their own abilities. So the benchmarking is done very subjectively. So there's flaws in 360, there's flaws in self-assessment, self-report, but there's value in self-report because behaviorally, you can't see what people are thinking and feeling while they're performing. And sometimes we need them to share that with us. So we have incorporated the research that we've done recognizes the value of this triangulation. Let's find out how they self-perceive their emotional abilities. Let's see how people around them judge their emotional practice in the real world. Not in a test, but actually at work, at home, in social occasions. But let's root that with a third leg on the stool, which is an objective measurement using situational judgment tests. So present a contextual rich situation to them, let them make an analysis of that situation, and then decide what's appropriate in terms of as a response if you was interacting in that situation. So it's out of context, it's not their workplace, but it's almost like a flight simulator. Let's take them into a flight simulator and use their judgments on what's right, not what I would do. You're back into self-report there. But I don't want to use correct or right. What's the appropriate thing in that situation for you to do if this situation is presented to you? And then we compare that with the theoretical base that's underneath the model and the subject matter experts' opinion. Only if 80% of the subject matter experts, if they agree that this is an appropriate answer, did it survive in the tool. If we only got 65% agreeing to it, we took the question out or we reframe the question. So we want 80% is significant in terms of agreement from.
So in order to say what's the right answer, I know some you like, for instance, some of what you've done is you've created video scenarios that people look at and they're asked to respond as if they were a part of the scenario somehow. And then they rate that. And you're saying subject matter experts at 80% have to agree on what's the right appropriate response. But one of the things I found when doing with the Mesquite all these years is that where the Mesquite, they talk about measuring potential, not performance. So that somebody might score high on a test like yours and not perform according to what those numbers tell you they could perform at.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, the 360 will tell you whether they're performing. So if I'm 80% on the objective tool, but my peers are telling me I'm 30%, that's a great trigger for a powerful conversation between the facilitator and the individual. So how is it that you've got the ability, but your people aren't seeing you apply it in the workplace? And it might be because I'm doing the work of 3 people. I'm stressed. I'm in corners. I'm doing 80 hours a week. Or I don't care. My boss treats me poorly. I don't care about the organization. I'm looking for another job. Or it could be I'm just lazy. Or it could be an attitudinal issue. So
let me stop you because we're running out of time. So one of the things that I did was I took the objective test. I didn't have peers rate me, right? I didn't have the other parts of what is it? What does the complete package look like? You take the test online. Then you have some peers that you have some kind of form that you send out to people, and you have to pick the people. By the way, that's an interesting choice too. Who decides, who picks, who's going to rate you? I've had some experience where certain leaders say, I don't want to pick. I don't want Chuck to pick. I want to pick for Chuck who I want to, or I want to rate him. So I'm not picking my friends then. I mean, I'm not sure that that's how it plays out, but that there's a question about who picks the people that are going to get targeted, right?
Must do the self-assessment. So they do self-assessment first before they get the objective report back. So they do the demographics, self-report, and then we've got that in the bank. They get the report immediately online, and it's emailed to them as a backup. So they've got the interpretation guidelines that go with it. So that they know what their score means when they've done that. We get them to trigger the 360, because sometimes that can take a week, 10 days to get back. Because now the organisation, we said, choose people who know you well, who you value the feedback, and people you want to be open and honest with you. So please choose wisely. If you want to choose, I mean, you're investing time in this tool. If you want to choose friends and brief them all to score you well, and that's what you want from your profile, then you're the customer. But can we advise you that if you wrote some real feedback, you might want to go for a mixture of people. Now, the organisation could dictate that a little bit by saying you must have your boss, 2 peers, and 2 direct reports. They might say your boss and 4 direct reports. So the organisation could set some parameters and conditions, which obviously we comply with. And so they send out a 360, and then once those are on the way, they can then engage in the situational judgment test. And then as soon as all the raters, because the rater is confidential, nobody knows which of the 5 profiles, you can't separate the 5 profiles, they come back as an aggregated average.
You don't know who your boss's profile is?
No, you can separate that out if the organisation and the individual want that. But with the default setting, if nobody asks for a variant, it's either aggregated. And that comes back as an average profile. You've then got your self-report, you've got your objective report. And the power of the differences between those is phenomenal.
Okay, that's really interesting. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do they find out about, how do they contact you saying they're interested and they want to explore this with you? How would they contact you?
They'll find it off the web, they'll buy the tools, or they'll contact us saying we want to put this into our corporation. We've all the pricing framework and the way it works is explained on the web, or it will be on 1st of June. And then we also
just to find you on the web. Do they look for under just Google Emotional Intelligence Academy? Would that get them there?
It's the EIAgroup.com.
EIAgroup.com. Okay.
Academygroup.com, and then they'll find the E factor on that website.
Great.
Also, the 24 facilitators will be promoting this in their countries too. So they're almost like resellers. So they can be so the tool is £100, about $110. But the facilitators, and this is transparent on the web, the facilitators get that at half price, so they can then resell the tool to their corporations and to their organizations. 95% of the customers will come direct to the website. So we're not relying on the facilitators to sell the tool, but they can do if they want to.
Okay, so if they go to the website, they can do this without a facilitator? They can just go to your website and get it, and
the infrastructure and the interpretation is sufficient for them to have a full picture of what their profile means. But if they want to go deeper, they can engage we have a page of our approved, certified, or will have on the 1st of June. So certified e-factor facilitators will be listed so that they can approach them. So it's the customer has the power. So they can go and use those services if they want to or if they need to. But there's sufficient in the manual that supports the profiles, there's sufficient interpretation and detail for them to make sense of their profile. And we have a hotline too, back to the headquarters.
Okay. Well, we've gone over the hour, so I'm going to have to edit some of this. Tell me a little bit about anything else that you think you want people to know about your tool and how to. Well, I think you've told us how to reach you. So anything else that you want to share at this point, Cliff? And then I'm going to close this out.
Not at all. I mean, it's just we're keen to get some good, open, honest feedback of anyone who wants to partake in it. The big thing we're looking for is, this is my big driver. My dad always said, don't die with your best song in your head if you're a composer. But this is not the end. But once we've validated, this is for adults 18 plus. this tool has been designed from adult research. Once we finish this, anyone who's interested in helping us take it to the next stage, to get us into schools, we want emotional skills, arithmetic, reading, writing, and emotional skill into 4-year-olds to 9-year-olds. We've talked about this before, Chuck, but that's my goal. If we can get the emotional skill into the school curriculum, infused in a sensible way, it's been tried before, but it's not really impacted. But if this can be done in a sensible way, we've already got the pilot infrastructure to do this. We're going to modify the E-Factor tool for the 4 to 9-year-olds, because surely prevention of the well-being, the therapy, the adolescent problems, the prison population, prevention of that kind of conflict, because people haven't got the skills to be self-aware, manage their emotions, to read other people and interrupt inappropriate behavior. If we can give them those skills early on, surely it's going to be a better world. So that's.
I agree with that. I would say that Ruler, Mark Brackett's work, from the director of Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Are you familiar with Ruler?
Yes, very, very, very much so. I've spoke to Mark about it. There's some parts of that I like, but there's some which I have reservations on. So,
okay, well, because I do know that Mark has done some incredible work, and that he's all over the world with Ruler. And I actually helped him when he first started out, because my first job, Cliff, was as a school counselor. So we should talk separately about that. But and also, one of my daughters is a special education teacher, so with those age groups. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what you're doing there. But anyway, I want to thank you, Cliff, for being on the show with us, and I look forward to seeing your work and going forward with it. And hopefully, there's a way to collaborate with you. I know that you've found in your model that that there's a couple places where you look for this concept that I call emotional place planning, that are part of the roadmap, that can be included with that, because I think that's a key part that goes past what we've known for a long time about how important it is to be self-aware, how important it is to understand what we're feeling, how important it is to try to manage those feelings and try to get along well in terms of relationships with others. Those have been out there forever. If we find more tools that help us to be better at all those things, that's great. And of course, I feel like this show and the Emotion Roadmap is a big part of helping people understand the power of trying to change your feelings when your feelings aren't helpful. And that's the part I hope to help you with as you go forward with this. So thanks so much for being our guest. We really appreciate it. I thank you, and I wish you much luck with this.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to stop. And thank you all for listening. And you've been listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, Listener Supported Radio. And thanks for tuning in. I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of each month at 12 noon p.m. Again, you can listen at 89.5 FM if you're in the Connecticut, Long Island area, or also you can listen online at WPKN.org. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.